Water in the Middle Ages was a paradox, capable of sustaining life or delivering sickness with equal ease. Every drop carried possibility, whether of refreshment or ruin. There were no chemical treatments, no chlorine, no filters designed in laboratories. Instead, survival depended on human observation, memory, and the quiet knowledge passed from generation to generation. People lived with water as both gift and threat, shaping their habits, their settlements, and even their medical theories around its mysteries. The central question is simple, though its answers were anything but. How did communities centuries ago make questionable water safer to drink, long before science explained why certain methods worked? The story is not of ignorance, but of ingenuity. By looking closely at the practices of medieval households, monasteries, physicians and travellers, we discover a forgotten craft of water care. Methods so ordinary they were almost invisible, yet vital to survival. In those centuries, water was not automatically seen as dangerous. A clear mountain spring or fast-flowing stream could be trusted without hesitation. But in crowded towns, expanding cities, and places where waste and industry gathered, the same element could quickly become deadly. A good source might nourish a community. A fouled one could unleash epidemics. People did not need microscopes to learn this lesson. Repeated outbreaks of sickness carved it into collective memory. Medieval physicians and healers paid close attention to water's qualities. They examined its clarity, tasted it for sweetness or bitterness, sniffed for foul odours, and even felt its temperature. Texts in Latin and Arabic circulated through Europe and the Middle East, advising which waters were healthiest. Springs bubbling from rock were praised, while swamp water or sluggish rivers were condemned. These judgments were based not on unseen microbes, but on centuries of careful human experience. In the countryside, streams flowing from rocky hillsides were blessings. In towns, however, water quickly became complicated. Butchers washed animal blood into the currents, tanners discarded foul chemicals, and households emptied waste near the same channels from which families drew their drinking supply. The dangers were invisible, yet widely understood. Drink from the wrong place and fever, cramps, or dysentery might follow. This awareness shaped daily routines. Families walked farther for cleaner wells. Market water carriers built reputations on knowing which fountains remained safe. Entire neighbourhoods lived by the rhythm of when and where water was fetched. During droughts, floods, or times of siege, when good water became scarce, people turned to time-tested techniques. These were not luxuries, but survival skills embedded in household practice. Filtering, settling, boiling when fuel permitted. These measures determined whether families endured illness or stayed well. The clarity of a jug was never taken for granted. Not all water sources were equal. The most prized came from deep, cold springs or carefully dug wells, where soil and stone filtered impurities naturally. Rainwater, when caught directly from the sky in clean vessels, was also valued, though it needed careful storage to remain usable. Rivers told a more complex story. In rural stretches, their swift currents seemed safe, but once those same rivers wound through towns, they turned dangerous. Stagnant water, according to medieval medical theory, bred corruption. Bad smells and sluggish flow were associated with disease, a reflection of the humoral system that linked foul airs with poor health. For the poorest, choice was limited. They fetched water from wherever it was closest, but those who could afford to be selective weighed their options carefully. Town charters sometimes reserved particular wells or springs for communal drinking, forbidding contamination by animals or trades. Monasteries and wealthy estates went further, diverting clean streams through channels directly into cloisters and private courtyards. To have such a source was both practical and a mark of prestige. Travellers, pilgrims and soldiers faced particular risk. Campaigns often collapsed, not because of enemy swords, but because of contaminated water that spread dysentery through entire armies. Guides who knew the location of pure springs were as valuable as strategists. Military leaders sometimes planned routes with fresh water access in mind. In this sense, knowledge of where to drink could decide the outcome of wars as surely as tactics on the battlefield. The everyday person, too, was far from careless. Without scientific vocabulary, they relied on observation and habit. They knew that some water turned the stomach while other water refreshed. They noticed when a stream tasted strange after heavy rain, or when a barrel of rainwater grew stagnant. They adapted, experimenting with ways to improve what they had. One of the simplest and most widespread methods required nothing more than fabric. Linen, when available, was the material of choice. Its weave was fine enough to trap visible debris, sand, soil, insects, plant fragments, while still letting water flow. Poorer families used wool or rougher cloth, sometimes folded several times to improve the effect. The process was straightforward. Pour the water slowly through the cloth. Catch the clearer liquid beneath. It did not eliminate invisible dangers, but it improved clarity and taste, which medieval people closely linked with health. This cloth straining technique appears in both European manuscripts and Arabic medical treatises, evidence of its wide cultural spread. The great scholar Avicenna advised filtering river water through cloth and then boiling it when possible. In homes across Europe, a jug might always be kept ready with a cloth tied across its mouth, ready to strain water as soon as it was fetched. The practice became second nature, woven into daily life just as surely as grinding grain or baking bread. Some households went further, layering fabrics or using specially woven bags suspended over basins. Wealthier families invested in dedicated filtering devices where water dripped slowly through cloth into a waiting jar. Layered filtration not only caught finer particles, but also reassured people that the water had been properly treated. Boiling water, when fuel allowed, was another safeguard. Monasteries, with their organized kitchens and stores of wood, were more likely to adopt boiling regularly, particularly during outbreaks of disease. But for ordinary families, cloth filtering was the everyday defense, practical, affordable, and reliable. The ingenuity extended further. In places with the resources, people built filtration systems with sand and gravel. Imagine a wooden trough or stone basin filled in layers. Large pebbles at the top, coarse sand beneath, then finer sand, and sometimes a layer of charcoal. Water poured into the top seeped down through each layer, emerging clearer and fresher at the bottom. Sediment collected at the top, smaller particles in the middle, and odours were reduced when charcoal was included. The result was water that looked bright, tasted cleaner, and stayed cool in storage vessels. Archaeological remains from monastic sites reveal such filtration systems, stone basins connected to water channels, designed to cleanse water before it reached kitchens or refectories. These resembled what modern engineers call slow sand filtration, still practiced in parts of the world today. The method was deliberate and time-consuming. Water trickled slowly, sometimes over hours, but the reward justified the wait. Clean water, especially during summer or religious fasting, was too precious to neglect. Maintenance mattered. Sand and gravel layers clogged over time and had to be replaced. In monasteries, lay brothers were tasked with cleaning filtration basins, ensuring the community supply remained pure. It was not just an act of hygiene, but of discipline, a daily responsibility that linked health with spiritual duty. Such practices reveal an essential truth. Medieval people were not indifferent to water safety. They adapted within the limits of what they knew. They recognized that source, treatment, and storage shaped water's quality. They practiced a quiet form of science without calling it so, an art of survival carried out in kitchens, cloisters, and marketplaces alike. Not every method of water care in the Middle Ages relied on cloth, sand, or gravel. In many regions, people turned to the plants that grew around them, blending practical observation with the medical theories of the day. Herbs were more than flavors for food. They were thought to influence the body's humors, cleanse the air, and strengthen health. So it is no surprise that they also found their way into the water jug. Thyme, rosemary and mint were among the most common additions. Their strong aromas masked the earthy or stagnant taste of stored rainwater and gave an impression of freshness. Sometimes bundles of herbs were simply dropped into barrels. In other cases, leaves were crushed to release oils, infusing the water more thoroughly. In southern Europe, where citrus fruits were more accessible, slices of lemon or orange were occasionally added alongside herbs, further sharpening the taste and smell. While the primary effect was sensory, it mattered deeply in a world where smell and flavour were associated with health. According to humoral theory, pleasant aromas balanced the body, while foul odours disturbed it. A jug of water steeped with mint not only tasted better, but was believed to soothe the stomach and encourage good digestion. Rosemary was linked with vitality, while thyme was thought to purify. Even when the herbs did not remove unseen pathogens, they reassured the drinker, encouraging them to consume water instead of risking thirst or relying solely on beer or wine. This blending of flavour and function reveals something important. People of the Middle Ages blurred the line between medicine and daily life. Every act of preparing food or water was also, in a sense, an act of healthcare. Adding herbs to a jug was a small ritual of protection, performed daily, repeated endlessly, shaping the way families thought about safety and nourishment. Another material held a special place in water treatment: charcoal. Its value lay in its ability to absorb impurities and reduce odours. Pieces of burned hardwood, such as oak or fruit tree branches, were placed directly into barrels or storage jars. Over time, the water tasted cleaner and lasted longer. Sailors and soldiers depended on this method during long journeys or campaigns. When casks of water grew stale, adding fresh charcoal extended their usability, sometimes meaning the difference between survival and sickness. Charcoal had several advantages. It required no special equipment, could be made anywhere firewood was available, and was simple to use. Monastic communities also understood its worth. In their cool stone cellars, jars lined with thin layers of charcoal preserved water for months. Combined with pre-filtering through cloth, the results were noticeably improved. Though no medieval person could explain adsorption in chemical terms, they observed its effects and passed the knowledge along. The practice spread across cultures. In Middle Eastern records as well as European manuscripts, charcoal appears as a quiet but effective purifier. It was low-cost insurance against unseen dangers, a tool of practicality in a world where fresh water was never taken for granted. But the greatest challenge of all lay in the cities. Medieval London, Paris, Bruges, and countless other towns were home to thousands of people, all dependent on shared supplies. A single contaminated source could spread illness across entire neighbourhoods. Urban authorities recognised the stakes. They invested in conduits, channels that carried water from cleaner springs outside the walls into central fountains within. These systems were often complex, involving carved stone pipes, underground tunnels, and settling basins. Settling tanks were key. By slowing the flow of water, they allowed sediment to sink to the bottom, leaving the upper layers clearer. Each morning, those who could afford it sent servants to fetch the first draw of water from these conduits, considered the cleanest. Later in the day, as more people used the fountains and stirred the flow, the water grew cloudier, suitable only for washing or livestock. To maintain order, conduit keepers were appointed. Their tasks ranged from clearing debris to preventing misuse. Rules were posted forbidding people from washing clothes or cleaning carcasses in the fountains. Fines were imposed, and in some cases guards were stationed to protect important supplies. Despite these measures, quality varied, and the poor often had no choice but to accept what was available. Yet the very existence of conduit systems shows how urban communities recognized that public health began with public water. The wealthier citizens sometimes went further, paying for private connections that brought conduit water directly into their homes, an early form of plumbing. Such arrangements were controversial, seen as diverting a communal resource for private benefit. Still, they reveal an emerging sense that clean water was not only a necessity, but a commodity worth investing in. No institutions cared more deeply for water than monasteries. Built for self-sufficiency, many chose sites near reliable springs or rivers. From there, carefully designed channels carried water into cloisters, feeding stone basins where sediment could settle. These supplies sustained not only drinking and cooking, but also brewing ale, tending gardens, and performing daily washings required by monastic rule. Clean water was both practical and symbolic. Monastic writings often link the clarity of a stream with the purity of the soul. Ritual washing became a reflection of inner cleansing. Maintaining water systems was therefore not only a task of hygiene but a form of devotion. Some monasteries built sophisticated filtration tanks, layering gravel, sand, and charcoal into stone basins. These systems mirrored the slow sand filtration methods rediscovered centuries later by modern engineers. In regions where clean water was scarce, monks boiled supplies before drinking or used them primarily in soups and beer, which were considered safer. Knowledge of these techniques was preserved in manuscripts, blending practical instructions with spiritual reflections. Clean water became both an earthly necessity and a heavenly metaphor. For travellers, pilgrims, and the poor, monasteries often offered charity in the form of safe drinking water, drawn from the same carefully guarded channels. In this way, monasteries acted as both physical and spiritual wells, protecting the art of water care from being lost. Yet not all knowledge was formalized in books or institutions. Much of it lived in ordinary households, shaped by tradition and folk belief. Some practices may strike us as superstition, but carried kernels of truth. One widespread custom was dropping a silver coin or spoon into a jug. Though no one in the Middle Ages could explain it scientifically, silver does have mild antimicrobial properties, making the water last longer. In rural villages, families created simple devices for filtering rainwater. Cloth bags filled with sand or powdered charcoal were hung in the path of runoff, catching impurities before the water flowed into barrels. Some positioned troughs of sand at doorways to filter water entering storage vessels. These small adjustments were part of everyday routines, requiring no literacy or wealth, only observation and habit. Other customs blended ritual with practicality. In some regions, water drawn before sunrise from a stream flowing east or west was considered especially pure. Branches of willow, hazel, or ash were dipped into wells to bless them before festivals. While the symbolism was strong, the choice of trees was not random. Each carried mild antiseptic qualities, giving the ritual a hidden logic. These practices reveal how the boundary between the magical and the mechanical was never firm. In an age when inherited wisdom mattered as much as reason, a ritual could also function as a treatment. What mattered most was not the explanation but the result. Water that tasted better, lasted longer, and caused fewer illnesses. Through cloth, herbs, charcoal, conduits, monasteries, and folk customs, medieval people built a web of techniques that kept their households alive. Their world lacked microscopes and chemical tests, but not insight. They worked with what they had, adapting methods until they fit the rhythms of daily life. And though their understanding of disease was incomplete, their practices reveal a clear truth. They were not passive victims of unsafe water. They fought back with patience, ingenuity, and respect for the resource that sustained them. As centuries passed, the quiet craft of water filtering began to fade, not because it had failed, but because new infrastructures reshaped daily habits. By the late Middle Ages and into the early modern era, towns and cities expanded their water systems. Aqueducts were rebuilt, conduits extended, and, later, industrial pumping stations emerged. With water flowing directly into fountains and sometimes even private homes, people assumed safety was guaranteed. That assumption proved dangerous. The very convenience that allowed households to draw water without effort also dulled caution. If water arrived through a pipe or spout, Surely it was pure, or so many believed. Cloth filters, herbal infusions, and charcoal-lined jars began to look old-fashioned, relics of poorer times. Yet the water that travelled through early pipes was not always free from contamination. Lead piping, leaking channels, and the mixing of waste and supply often undermined the promise of progress. Still, confidence in central systems grew. The painstaking household rituals of filtering and settling water slowly receded. In wealthier districts, the illusion of security replaced the discipline of vigilance. Only in rural communities, far from urban aqueducts, did traditional methods persist, quietly maintained by families who relied on their wells, streams, and rain barrels. These practices, overlooked by official records, survived as habits, superstitions, and inherited wisdom. By the 19th century, germ theory reshaped public health. Scientists demonstrated that diseases spread not by foul smells alone, but by microscopic organisms invisible to the naked eye. Ironically, this new knowledge confirmed what medieval households and monasteries had practiced for centuries, that filtering water through sand, charcoal, or cloth could prevent sickness. What had once been dismissed as quaint custom was rediscovered as effective science. But by then, most of those methods had already vanished from daily life, remembered only in folklore or preserved in manuscripts. Archaeology offers glimpses of what was lost. Stone basins lined with sand, fragments of woven filtering bags, manuscripts describing how to sweeten water with mint. Each fragment reminds us of the ingenuity of ordinary people. Their tools were simple, yet their results strikingly modern. They did not need to understand microbes to know that clarity, taste, and smell were signs worth trusting. They did not need laboratories to recognize that stagnant ponds carried danger, while spring-fed wells gave life. Among the more curious survivals are the charms and rituals that once guarded water. A silver coin dropped into a jug, a sprig of rosemary hung in a barrel, water fetched before sunrise. These actions speak of a world where science, superstition, and observation blended seamlessly. Even when the explanation was mistaken, the outcome often worked. Silver slowed bacterial growth. Aromatic herbs discouraged drinking from foul-smelling sources. Water fetched at dawn, cool and freshly flowing, was indeed safer than water stirred later in the day. Such practices remind us that medieval life was not blind ignorance, it was adaptation. People learned through repetition, by trial and error, and by watching what worked. Their world was fragile, their tools limited, yet their respect for water was profound. Every drop mattered, and every method to keep it safe became part of the rhythm of survival. Monastic communities especially embodied this dual awareness. They treated water as both necessity and metaphor. To filter it was to purify the body but also the soul. Their manuscripts preserved techniques alongside prayers. Their cloisters became centres where practical craft and spiritual reflection intertwined. Even today, ruins of their water systems stand as silent witnesses. Stone channels, carved basins, layers of gravel still intact centuries later. The decline of these traditions was not a failure, but a transformation. New technologies took their place, reshaping confidence and responsibility. Yet progress came unevenly. In many rural places, old methods endured well into the modern age. Cloth straining, charcoal jars, and herbal steeping were not abandoned overnight. They lingered wherever pipes and pumps did not reach. And though urban centres adopted central systems, outbreaks of cholera and typhoid in the 19th century proved that older wisdom should not have been so quickly forgotten. Today, modern science confirms the value of these practices. Slow sand filtration remains a recognised method, still in use in parts of the world. Charcoal is used in countless modern filters for its ability to absorb impurities and improve taste. Silver ions are employed in advanced purification systems. What medieval people discovered through necessity, modern engineers have refined with chemistry. The continuity is striking. Yet the lesson is more than technical. It is cultural. Medieval people lived with a deep awareness of their dependence on water. They respected its power, feared its dangers, and treated it with care. Their methods may seem simple to us: cloth, herbs, gravel, but they reveal a way of thinking that valued adaptation, observation, and community responsibility. In a time when every household bore the burden of making water safe, knowledge was survival, and forgetting was peril. We often imagine the Middle Ages as an age of filth, where people drank without caution and fell ill without understanding why. The truth is far richer. They noticed patterns, they shared wisdom, they built systems, they experimented, improvised, and remembered. Their world was not one of blind ignorance, but of practical resilience. To drink safely was to engage in a quiet science, repeated at every hearth, every well, every cloister fountain. It was not the science of microscopes or chemical equations, but of patient observation and lived experience. And it worked well enough to sustain centuries of life before modern laboratories ever explained why. What survives today is not only the evidence of their methods, but the reminder of their mindset. They did not take water for granted. They knew its risks, respected its gifts, and never assumed safety without effort. In that sense, their lessons remain relevant. In times when access to clean water is once again uncertain for millions, the memory of medieval practices speaks with unexpected urgency. Water could heal. Water could kill. And in between lay the daily craft of care, straining, boiling, filtering, sweetening, blessing. A craft almost forgotten, yet echoing still in the way we treat water today. If you found this glimpse into forgotten skills compelling, then continue your journey here. The past still flows, carrying voices, practices, and wisdoms long hidden, waiting to be remembered. Subscribe to Silent Time Traveller and let history's quiet streams guide you further.